Hello, Seaside Shadows, and welcome to Spooky Story Sunday. We typically would love to meet you by the bonfire, but we have some storms going through the area this evening. So we are sheltered with our candles and Sunshine's crystal ball as we are here to tell you perhaps one of the most disturbing legends in both Connecticut and New England history or American history. And we usually like to bring to you stories of ghosts and haunted history. But when lore such as this comes to our attention, we can't help but talk about it. And for this Spooky Story Sunday, we are going to introduce you to the creatures that lurk in the wooded areas of southwestern Connecticut. Creatures known by locals all across the state as the Melonheads. So the Melonheads, what are they? Their name gives you a little bit of information on why they look the way they do. So the Melonheads are believed to be these group of inbred people, perhaps with other things going on that would affect their physical appearance, but inbred people that are residing in the woods, perhaps for decades, if not centuries. Now, these folks are estimated to be only about 3 foot tall, and perhaps not even fully human by some people's standards. You know, that there's a variety of reasons they look the way they do, but they might not be fully human is, of course, part of the description. And they look this way because of the centuries of inbreeding, of course, with human type people, but also because of their diet. Their diet consisting of cannibalism, eating humans and each other. So what they look like are believed to be 3 foot tall, with very long, kind of spindly arms and legs, elongated fingers, so their limbs don't match their very short torso. And their head is described by some to be as wide as the lid of a garbage can. So sitting on top of these 3 foot tall, spindly bodies are these cannibalistic people with these big heads living in the woods of southwestern Connecticut. Now, there are a variety of towns that boast to be home to the Melonheads if they want to boast about such a thing. I suppose they could. Now, we'll tell you, of course, the Melonhead hotspots at the end of this, in case you're feeling brave enough to seek them out. We're not feeling so brave. We're pretty happy we live in eastern Connecticut at the time of this filming.
Yes.
However, you may be wondering, how did these group of cannibalistic, inbred, humanoid creatures come to live in the woods of southwestern Connecticut? So, Sunshine, what is the first theory that's here in our state about the origination of the Melonheads?
Well, the first story about it is that there was a mental hospital in Fairfield. It was Fairfield Hills State Mental Hospital, and it was actually in Newtown, which is still part of Fairfield County. And it burned down, and they're saying that some of the people who escaped from the fire went and hid into the woods because they didn't find everyone's body. And you know what? At that, it's a state mental facility, so probably there were people who didn't care about these people at all. And allegedly they went into the forest and became feral and had their own society in which there was inbreeding, and it created this sort of stunted growth and this shape of the head. And they're also rumored to have sharp teeth, good for gnawing teenage flesh. Now, in Fairfield, there's rumored that they live around the forest in Lake Mohegan, which is a place where people like to walk their dogs. It's a park there.
Right.
And there's some quiet spots there. I've never really felt it there. But there's that theory that there's a pocket of them living there.
Right.
And then there is a prison in Danbury, correctional facility called Grandin.
Yes, and also one in Newtown too. Oddly,
Newtown.
They have an asylum and a prison
That burned down the
good.
same time, right?
Yes,
And
yes.
in fact, I believe that one of these locations was rumored to be burned down by the inmates / patients. And so obviously they weren't happy there. and they went into the forest, and allegedly they lived off of the flesh of their caretakers.
Right, because
The
no
interns.
caretakers survived these fires.
That's so creepy.
And there were those 10 to 20 people that were never found and accounted for that are assumed to be the first Melon-heads, or the people that started this. Now, this happened in 1960, right?
Right.
So we're talking decades ago, almost a century ago. We're talking, though, maybe 60 years, so not close to a century. Now, this prison started in 1860, so it takes 100 years for these Melon-heads to kind of come up with their plan and escape the prison or the mental asylum. And one thing that I've never figured out, too, in the description is it says they have red eyes.
Ugh.
So, there has to be something more than meets the eye with, no pun intended, with why they have red eyes and where they come from. So that's another peculiar thing. So
they could be albino with red eyes. I mean, maybe. I
feel like that's a lot in one spot.
I know. Well, then there's also, I think, wasn't there spread out through Stratfield? More Melonheads?
So there's also Shelton and Trumbull. They boast Melonheads, but they boast a different origination to their Melonheads. An earlier origination. So many of you are probably familiar with, of course, the Salem witch trials of 1692. Now, the Salem witch trials created hysteria across New England. It had been almost a century since the witch trials in medieval Europe, but here in Puritan New England, fears were running rampant once again, and this hysteria in Salem, the accusing of all these innocent folks, was really taking heart across New England. And Connecticut did have its own witch trials as well, and in all of these towns where people who were seen to be different by their community were being ostracized or accused of witchcraft, there were those who could almost see the writing on the wall for themselves. So when they saw the potential that they could be the next accused because perhaps someone with position in town did not like them, they made, their decision that they were going to find someplace else to live. So some of these folks would go live with family, or they would go off into the woods and create almost a temporary shelter, hoping that they could return to their homes when the witchcraft hysteria passed. So these are, of course, some of our earliest Puritan settlers here in New England that are off hiding, in the woods of Connecticut and the surrounding area. So one theory has it that in Shelton and Trumbull, there was a local family that people were suspicious of as conducting witchcraft, of course, during this time. And they remain unnamed in legend, but it is told that they made a quick escape and lived out in the woods of Shelton and Trumbull.
Suspicious.
Right. But they were told to never return to that home, as so many others kind of did, or their family records sort of would come back up. It was said that this family went into the woods and never returned. But the theory is that that family, hundreds of years later, is still very much there through their descendants. But how does one have descendants if just one's immediate family makes it into the woods? That's where the incest theory comes into play, and it is believed that through incest, this family continued to reproduce, but were so peculiar in their appearance that they could never mainstream with society. So they lived in the woods.
Right.
So they are, the Shelton and Trumbull Melonheads, perhaps a little bit different in origination, though similar in appearance, from the Newtown and Danbury Melonheads.
But all of them living off of, allegedly, like flesh of teenagers that are out walking in the woods, backpackers that are never found again. Their stuff is, but they aren't. Cats, squirrels.
Yeah.
And you can imagine that not only just with the inbreeding, but also with the diet that they have. They can't really be too healthy, so that must be part of their appearance.
Their odd appearance. So whether they're descended from accused witches or escaped asylum patients or prisoners, they do share in their cannibalistic tendencies, their incest, and they're strange again. Short torso, big head, red eyes, elongated limbs. And you may be wondering, okay, you guys can describe this, right? You can describe this legend. Any legend has good, descriptions and adjectives of strange creatures. But has anyone ever seen such a thing? Well, surely we are here to tell you that in the 1980s,
which is not that long ago.
No. I myself was born in the 80s, so people I know were alive and well at the time of this sighting. So this story comes from the 1980s, and it comes from the Fairfield region in Connecticut. And the tale comes from a woman named Megan O'Connell. She was just a teenager at the time, and she was attending the Notre Dame High School in Fairfield. Now, Megan and a few of her friends had attended a football game that Friday night, and after the football game was over and it was a chilly evening, they wanted to go out, have some drinks, warm up, maybe party a little bit. But they also, after partying a little bit, decided how fun would it be to sort of be part of a local legend. And they, as all the other teenagers around them had heard of the Melon-heads, and they thought, well, we can go into the woods and go see them, right? And so they all piled into Megan's bright baby blue Granada. And they made their way in Trumbull to Velvet Street. So Trumbull, you may remember, has our witch-descended Melonheads. And they knew that is where they were known to lurk. And in all of these towns, they have favored streets, and we'll tell you what those are. But the nickname for these streets is Dracula Drive, because of these menacing, weirdly toothed creatures that are wandering about.
And I'm sure that the kids were really worked up.
Of course.
In the 80s, there was no cell phones. It was cable TV if you had it, right? So this was an exciting adventure to, we're going to scare each other and scare
right, and it's the adrenaline of the thrill-seeking.
Will we see it?
Yes, and all of these roads, by the way, are just dirt roads, which adds to almost that Texas Chainsaw Massacre ambiance that we have going on. Well, the girls decided they wanted to turn their music up. They're partying and they're going down this dirt road, listening to their music, and when the road kind of ended almost at the wooded line, they turned their car off. They just turned their car off and turned off the music and even turned off the headlights. They were ready to get good and spooked.
So creepy.
And there were actually, I'm looking here, there were 6 girls piled into that Granada. So they were having a good time.
That's a lot of witnesses.
And it was a full moon, so they had some visual to where they were. And as they were sort of sitting there in the full moon, giggling and laughing about, they heard an owl hooting. And they decided to get out and investigate. And as they were investigating, the hooting owl under the full moon, a little tipsy probably, trying to make sure that it's really an animal, they heard something that was not an animal.
Right.
They heard something that was not the owl, it was not a wolf. All of a sudden they hear a very familiar sound. The Granada, the engine has started and it's revving.
Someone carjacked them.
Right. So now someone, God forbid, creepy, has followed them into the woods.
Right.
And then all of a sudden the Granada's horn blared. Someone was in the car daring to beep at them. The headlights turned on, high, low, high, low, high, low, flashing at the girls. And then they continued to rev the engine. All of a sudden, the Granada went forward as fast as you can imagine and headed right towards the girls. They described it like it was a monster headed in their direction. It went from side to side. They said spitting dirt in every direction, and the girls quickly diverted into the woods, out of the way, hidden in the trees so that they could not be hit by their own car. Now, after they were hiding behind the rocks and trees, they watched the car go past them, and inside the car,
Oh my God.
inside the car they look. Remember, they have the full moon illuminating the evening, and they see these big-headed, short creatures that they had thought were just some sort of legend.
What would you do?
And they even said that the creatures howled as they went by, making almost like they were mimicking animals to get the girls out of the car. Now, the girls ran across the road, made it to the highway, and walked home under the street lamps. But of course, that has not stopped the Melonheads, because now they have a vehicle.
Now they drive.
A vehicle that they tinker with and somehow manage to fuel up. And the good people of Shelton and Trumbull stay. They still see that old Granada rolling around town, and some vehicle enthusiasts are curious about the old car, but then they see the big-headed, tiny people rumbling by, and they dare not follow that Granada around Trumbull. Now, that is one of the most well-known sightings of the Melonheads, and perhaps one of the most frightening.
Scary.
There are many locals who continue to tell their tales, and their parents' tales, and their grandparents' tales of their sightings of the local Melonheads. One gentleman in the Trumbull area even says that he saw a baby Melonhead, and that it was already scary looking. And so there's a variety of legends that state that they are indeed real. And Melonheads are tied to a variety of regions, but in Connecticut, they're pretty well known for those Dracula drives in southwestern Connecticut.
Yes.
So we wanted to make sure that you knew where some of these were, should you want to go out and seek them. Now, we must tell you, it is true that people do go missing, right, Sunshine?
Yes, people do. So it's, honestly, this is the kind of cryptid I'm afraid of.
Yes.
And if someone dared me when I'd had a couple drinks, I probably would say, yeah, let's go look for them.
Yes.
And I'd probably find one.
So are you saying if there's a Spooky Story Sunday where you and I are in the woods after a couple of glasses of whiskey, don't be surprised?
Don't be surprised at all what we might find. However, I feel this way. Whatever it is you do go looking for, you're going to find it. So
yes, the girls thought it was all fun and games until the Melonheads took their car.
They stole their car. And then there's a number of different places where people have reported seeing them as well, and not just alone, but groups of hikers, people that are together. And then there are also a number of teenagers that have gone missing, and again, it's like their backpacks are found. And I think that might just be because the teenagers are out in the woods and they're curious about things. Like, as an older person, I would probably be highly suspicious if I felt something that was off.
But they're more apt to thrill seek.
Yeah,
see
they're
what's
like,
going on.
what's happening? And also to seek it out. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't go looking for Bigfoot either,
No, if he wanders by, I guess that'll be exciting.
But no thanks.
For those of you that love Marty, the man behind the camera who sometimes shows his face, we have a joke that he and my brother-in-law are going to be old men just sitting on a porch waiting for Bigfoot to walk by one day, probably telling me and my sister that he came by, and we'll never believe them, but it's a theory we have working.
Get a selfie.
But I want you guys to know, should you, at your own risk,
Yes.
at your own risk, we are not asking you to go out, but if you want to, where can you go? So these roads, these dirt roads, as we mentioned, are known as Dracula Drive, and every town has their own Dracula Drive, as we mentioned, that has the Melonheads. Now, in Shelton, there's a road called Sawmill City Road, so that is considered to be the main Dracula Drive. There's also Edmonds Road in Oxford. There is the aforementioned, where the Granada was stolen, Velvet Street in Trumbull, and that's also in Monroe. It runs between Tashua Road in Trumbull and Judd Road in Monroe.
That's a very creepy stretch of land. It's really very wooded. I could see how this could happen.
And it's near the Easton border, which, if you guys are familiar with Easton Cemetery, that's where the lady in white that the Warrens actually, first documented in their paranormal career does reside. There's also the Zion Hill Road in Milford, the roads that Sunshine mentioned around Lake Mohegan in Fairfield, the Marginal Road in New Haven, so they'll even find some woods in the city.
Oh my God.
The Jeremy Swamp Road in Southbury, and there's a variety of paths and roads in the Roosevelt Forest in Stratford. So you have some options here. We told you a little bit about, of course, the Velvet Street and also the roads around Lake Mohegan. But all of these are said to be homes of the Melonheads, be them the descendants of accused witches or the escapees. It is something that no one knows for sure their origination. And if they are indeed even human creatures anymore, would be deemed cryptids, like Sunshine mentioned. So if you dare and you feel safe that your car will not be stolen and yourself made a meal out of for the Melonheads, I suppose you could check it out. But it definitely is a risk, and I think for a while we might leave the Melonheads be and perhaps not even let them know. Hopefully they don't have the internet so they can't see that we know about them.
Oh my God,
you know?
Courtney.
To any Melonheads watching, you just do you.
I'm so scared of the Melonheads.
It's disturbing, to be sure, but something we can't prove false.
Honestly, I've walked my dog so many times in that area of Fairfield, and I never really...
A Melonhead never came out?
I never saw a Melonhead, but now that I know about it, I would never go there by myself. Some cryptids really creep me out, and this is one of them.
And next time you hear an owl hooting, will you follow it, or...?
Well, I don't know now.
I don't know.
It depends on if I'm on Dracula Drive.
I guess if we're not in Southwestern Connecticut,
we're safe in Southeastern Connecticut. We have other very much happier cryptids that only show up once in a while.
Some are happy,
yeah.
But you'll have to come on a tour to find out more.
That's right.
We want to thank you guys so much for joining us for this Spooky Story Sunday about what Sunshine calls the gross Melonheads. I just find them, disturbing, but I find disturbing things sometimes delightful to talk about. So we are so happy that you joined us for this special segment. If you have any questions about this or any of our recent segments, including the Hartford Circus Fire and Beltane, we hope that you'll join us next week on Mystical Monday, where we can answer those questions for you. Until then, happy haunts, and we'll see you next week.